Yeah, we changed
What did you do?
the batteries. So maybe
So I'll
that
I'll
was
put it on my
it.
neck again, shall I?
Yes.
Okay, let's try. Hang on. All right. See if it works. See if it works. Does it work?
Yes.
You can hear me all right?
Yes.
No crackling, no interference. Okay. Okay. So here we are today. A little bit to talk, think about, analyze, contemplate, internalize if we choose to, this information, which is advice coming from the Buddha through the minds and lives of all these, first these Indians, and it went to Tibet and through the Tibetans, and now they've all come to our world through them. This knowledge passed on. About what? About how to turn yourself into a marvelous person. That is this natural potential we have to be free of neuroses and full of goodness. This is really Buddha's view. One, for our own sake, and two, for the sake of others. We all live in this crazy world together, don't we? We're thinking we're listening for this reason, to help us become this marvelous, better person, so we can be a benefit to others in the world. Speaking simply. Think like that. Okay. So what's our topic today? Does it say something on the pages? What's
Death
it?
and impermanence.
Death and impermanence. Yeah, we can talk about that maybe. Okay, why not? So there's this book of Lamas Rinpoche's that I happen to be so fortunate to edit, so to become familiar with, called How to Face Death Without Fear. So we all know about death, our pussycats, our dogs, our grandma, so we all need to know. And as Lama Zopa says, it's kind of education we all need. So what's interesting is the point he makes, he says, if you want to help anybody in this life, meaning your pussy, your doggy, your wife, the time they need you most is at the time of death. Now that sounds really weird in the Western world, because the time of death is when you disappear into a puff of smoke, isn't it? It's like we think that's the least time they need you. Mm-hmm. So what does he mean by that? It's kind of interesting. Of course, this is based on the entire Buddhist view, which is quite radically different from the materialist view, and even indeed from the Christian view, or similar in the sense of the Christian view or the Muslim view, that something continues after you die. So of course the Buddhist view also is that you come from before. Like if you're a Christian or a Muslim or any of the creator religions, you come from God. If you're a materialist, you come from mummy and daddy and track yourself back to the monkeys. If you're a Buddhist, the view is you come from previous moments of your own mind. Your own mind is this continuity. And we've of course been talking about that all this Thursday, Friday, Saturday. This is the fundamental view in Buddhism. So we take that as our hypothesis. So the other thing that is totally appropriate here to understand in terms of helping at death is the other thing we've been talking about this week is the whole business of karma, this natural law, as far as the Buddha is concerned, that kind of really runs the universe. Such that every sentient being, whatever we think and do and say, that's the process of producing oneself. So we know, I use this example, and this is really what karma means. It sounds very curious. We don't think this way, but if you study music, you know very well that you produce a musician. You need Bach's music, you need Mr. Steinway's piano, you need a good teacher, but you do the work. And the work you do in your mind and with your hands is what turns you into the musician. So in a sense, you create the musician. That's not surprising to us. But when it comes to becoming a happy person or a suffering person, we don't think that at all. We think everybody else does it to us. We think it's my husband's job to make me happy, and then you get angry when he doesn't. But the Buddha says, guess what, folks? You can turn yourself into the person you want to become. And in that way, he's talking simply about, the mind, what goes on in the mind. So this is very relevant to the time of death, because the Buddhist view is, as Lama Zopa points out in this book, there's this very detailed process, it's like very technical, this detailed process that one goes through. They describe it in terms of 8 stages. And there's like this gradual deconstruction of the various components of the person. It's quite detailed, quite fascinating, actually. What arises at the time of death, what occurs at the time of death, how you die, what's the best environment in which to die, the way to die. Why, though? Why is it important that at the time of death is when the person wants you most? Simply because, from the Buddhist perspective, inexorably your consciousness will continue. And if you have that view, which is a bit abstract for you, if you're a Christian, that makes sense. And but there's one option you do want, which is heaven. You don't want to go to the other one. We want heaven. So that's a similar idea. But the Buddhist view is you've got more than just options like that. The mind will continue to another human body, could be an animal birth, could be like a similar type of experiences, like the way they describe heaven. There's many different types of experiences. But the crucial thing in the Buddhist view is that we produce that. We sow the seeds in our mind. We create the causes. And that's what part of what our life is. To learn to be a good person, to be ethical, to not harm, kill, steal, lie. Why not? Because that produces the person you want to become, a nice, kind, wise, ethical person. And so as you continue to practice, you produce the person in this life, and then you sow all the right seeds. And at the time of death, those particular virtuous seeds ripen that will then determine your next life. I mean, it's pretty abstract for us if we don't have that view of reincarnation. And even if we do have a view of vaguely reincarnation, we don't have much of an idea of what causes it. It's like pot luck, you know. No, it's a natural law for the Buddha. It's not pot luck at all. It's not good luck and bad luck. It's a very clear process. So one needs to become familiar with it. So we can use an example of our own case. This is the Buddha's teaching, you know, that not more than, so the Buddha's view is that our consciousness goes back and back and back, and it will go forward, forward, forward. And then what goes on in this mind of ours, this consciousness of ours, is based upon the work that we do. The law of karma is this natural law. No one runs it. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's a natural law. And so we better learn, if it is a natural law, and that means that what negative actions, negative tendencies, unhappy tendencies can only produce more suffering for oneself, and positive ones can only produce happiness for oneself, in a simple sense. Not moralistic, but practical. So then you realize, well, I don't want future suffering. I better learn this law so I can use it to my advantage. It's a simple way of putting it, you know. So at the time of death, it all kicks into place. So, you know, if every second, as we've been talking about karma, if every second of what I think and do and say kind of stays in my mind, leaves seeds in my mind, programs my mind, then we, you know, using the analogy of seeds, I use that a lot. We've got millions of karmic seeds from our tendencies, our actions in the past, in our little bank vault, if you like. Clearly Buddha doesn't talk about a bank vault, but get the idea. So we want one of the virtuous ones, one of the positive ones. So specifically a particular strong intentional karmic seed of intentional non-harming, basic good ethics, the wish not to kill, not to steal, not to harm, not to lie. This is a fundamental kind of process in Buddhist practice, which is shared by any good person. Good ethics is pretty reasonable. But you're the beneficiary of it as well. We want one of those seeds to be triggered. So we can say in our case, having a human body, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our mummy's fallopian tube when the daddy and mummy's egg and sperm got together, as we went through the death process just a few weeks before, at the first stages, at about this time, even before we stop breathing, this process kicks into action. So depending on how you are at that time, and this is why you need it to help your pussy die peacefully, to help your grandma die peacefully. Not meaning you make them die, but you're with them, kind of metaphorically holding their hand through this process, because fear is very common. Because most of us don't think about death, you know, but we know it's going to happen. We don't like it, so we ignore it. And then when it does happen, this natural, very strong attachment to ourself kicks in and brings a lot of fear. So we need help to navigate that process. So being loving and kind and supportive, whether it's your pussy or little moth or your grandma, same thing, you know, help them be peaceful, help them feel confident, help them feel secure. So when this process starts, before even you stop breathing, in our case, one of our karmic seeds from the past of non-killing in particular, practiced no doubt in a spiritual path, as Lama Zopa says, probably practiced in the context of keeping vows of not killing. We can discuss vows maybe today. We've only got an hour and a half, haven't we? I better talk fast, huh? I mean, what's new? Apparently. Okay, we'll do what I can in the hour and a half. Huh? What, darling? What happened?
I was asking my friend if she can hear you.
Can you hear me, darling?
She has a bit of a hearing.
I have too. I promise. Can you hear me?
Mostly.
But it's my Australian accent that's the problem, isn't it?
It's over the hill that I missed that.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll try and talk a little bit more precisely.
Yeah.
No, I'll try and talk more clearly. Okay. So it's very likely, with the Buddhist approach, at the time of our past death, I know this sounds like science fiction to us, and we don't talk this way, you know. And if you're Christian and devoted to God, I'm not criticizing, then there's nothing like this because God made you, you know, so it's a very different view, isn't it? I'm just telling you. So it's likely that a virtuous karmic seed of our own past practice of virtue, goodness, was triggered, which already programmed us to come to our current mummy and daddy a few weeks later. This is very surprising to us. Second, the karmic seeds that would produce our personality. You've been good at music or good at football or good at killing or good at love, good at kindness, whatever. They were all triggered. Then the karmic seeds would then be the one that would cause us the way we're seen and treated in life by friends and enemies and mummies and daddies and strangers and, you know, husbands and children and people at work, all the relationships we have. All this is due to our past actions. As the Dalai Lama says, sort of like being colloquial, the law of karma is like self-creation. You know, we're not the product of somebody else's handiwork. We're not the handiwork of someone else. This is quite a shock to us. Because if you're a materialist, mummy and daddy make you. And if you're a Christian, and I'm not being disrespectful, God made you. But this is a different view. Very fascinating. So then all these karmic seeds are kind of ready. So then, you know, eventually your consciousness, your mind leaves the body. And then there's sort of this, they call intermediate state. And then when your new mummy and daddy, in our case, hopped into bed, or wherever they hopped, then our mind went running and ran and joined that egg and sperm. That's what they say. So we created the cause to have this life. I have to turn my phone off. Or do something, put on airplane mode. That'll do. So this is the idea of the Buddhist view of karma. So then so in this life, we're acting out all those karmic seeds that we planted. So then now when we're getting towards death, the same thing's going to happen. So of course, now, so let's just first look though at why it is we don't like to think about death. It's very common, totally normal, isn't it? Because we don't like mostly because we're so deeply instinctively attached to this sense of me. You know, we don't want to let go of me. It's so primordial, it's sort of obvious. As Lama Zopa says, at the time of death, the main fear is called fear, which is very common, is caused by strong grasping at not wanting to let go of me. Not even our mummy and our daddy and our money, of me and the body, you know. This is the greatest fear we have. It brings the greatest fear. So the real one is how to help at death. Let's just cut to the chase. How do you help someone at the time of their death go through the process of being sick and old or whatever? Well, you've got to know the person's mind well. So if your mummy loves God and she's a devoted Catholic, then, you know, one of the things to do is you talk about God, talk about heaven, make her feel good about that, remind her God loves her. That's a really powerful point. But if your mummy's a communist, I would suggest you don't do that. You've got to know your mummy. You've got to know what she likes, what's good for her. You can't shove it down her throat. You understand? But if your mummy is a Buddhist, let's say, or somebody, you put Buddhist images and you talk about the Buddha, it's a way, the key thing is, and we all know this, when you're miserable in life, when something bad happens, the first thing we do is think of who can support me. We turn to somebody. And so that's why it's so sad when people have no one to turn to. We know that. That's why often I think of these ugly some of the sad old people's homes where people are like just treated like veggies, television stuffed down their throat all day, drugged out of their brains. If just the cleaning lady can be kind to them. So we discussed this. So just being there as a presence, and this is including for your dog. Your dog adores you. Make it feel safe by your presence. Just your presence is the best medicine possible. So your grandmother, your sister, your friend, it's the same thing. This is the most precious gift, and it's so simple. There's nothing technical you have to learn. You just have to be kind, be loving. So that supports the person. It's very powerful. I think we know that in our daily life. When something goes wrong, you call out to somebody. You know, I was in my friend in Kathmandu at Courtin Monastery, and I was going down the steps, about 100 steps down the hill to see my friend Fran. And I fell and I screamed out, Fran! Do you understand? It's like you're calling out for mummy, you know? So it's so nice to have someone to support you. We need that. This is the most precious gift to give. Not just to kill them. Okay, we kill each other these days. We call it euthanasia. Your pet or your grandma. No, try and just help them be content, help them feel secure. So that means, you know, for example, if your mummy loves God, talk about God. Talk about heaven. Remind her. Talk about her good qualities. This is, I tell you, one of the most precious things we can do in daily life as well. Praise the person. You thank your mother for her good job. What a kind person she's been. What a good mother. What a good grandmother. We never hear good words like this, and we never tell ourselves good things like this. We just take our mums for granted when we remember all their bad things, you know. Tell them what a lovely mother she's been. This is like nectar for her heart and will calm her mind down. We all know we always think of our bad qualities. So there's your mum dying, not wanting to hear about it, worried, fearful, guilty. Tell her lovely things. I mean, it's so simple in some way. Make her, the bottom line is to make her feel comfortable, secure, and peaceful. So when the mind is peaceful, then the mind can be kind of positive. The mind can think of loving things and kind things. But if you're freaking out and fearful, you're panicking, you're thinking about ego, you're thinking about I, everything's fearful. It's the worst way to die, because that will trigger a negative karmic seed. You want to be peaceful and virtuous or positive, because that state of mind will help trigger a positive karmic seed, which will then programs you for another decent human life so you can keep on moving on your spiritual path. It's really the idea, you know. Yes. Is that a hand? Yes.
One quick question.
Yes.
Is the karmic seed triggered by emotions, or is it triggered by action?
Start again.
Is it triggered by emotions or triggered by action?
Which? This karmic seed.
Yes.
It's really mainly the way your mind is. Especially if you're dying and maybe you're sick, and you know, if you're dying slowly, then the mind is the most important. So how you can help that is, one way is being kind and being loving and talking about God or heaven or Buddha, whatever suits the person, or even just hearing things like, if maybe your mummy's in a coma or your dog is sick, just play mantras, play very peaceful, sweet, spiritual sounds, which can help their mind be peaceful. It's the mind that's the most important. Do you understand? That makes sense, right?
Yes.
So of course, the best way is to practice it throughout your life. Don't wait till death to practice. It's a bit late. It's a bit like saying, oh, I've got my driving test in a month. I'll be okay on the day. No, you won't. You've got to start now. It's very logical, you know. So that's why one way of talking about how to prepare for death is live a good life. It's really obvious, you know. Whether you believe in reincarnation or heaven or nothing, it doesn't matter. Your mind will be virtuous and peaceful, and you won't have fear, and you'll relax, and you'll be able to die peacefully. So it's very interesting these days. I see that there's so much emphasis in the medical profession now on helping people at the time of death, which is wonderful. Like the hospice movement is so moving. I did a conference in Australia, and it was about the death process. And all now these days, younger people, nurses and doctors, are electing to work in this part of the world. It's marvelous. It's part of the medical profession, helping old people, sick people, dying people. I went to this wonderful conference about this children's hospital where babies die, which is the worst fear for us, you know. And so he was such a good, kind doctor, opening up the whole subject, trying to be open about it, not fearful, dealing with everybody. And one of the things was the morgue for the little dead babies. He had it decorated like a nursery, and it was open. And the little brothers and sisters would walk in and out, come and meet my dead brother, you know, making it not so fearful. It was so kind, you know. So, of course, that's all excellent. But the particular point in the Buddhist one is not just to make it nice now, including for the family, but to make it conducive for the person who's dying. So when you're really helping a person who's dying, the main thing is they should be the boss of the situation. So what goes on in their room should be for their sake. So, for example, one of the ways, because the mind gets very sensitive as you're getting older or sicker, your mind is so sensitive, even loud noises can be so distressing. So another most important thing is to have it very peaceful. So keep the noisy troublemakers out of the room. If you're in charge of it, don't just let everybody barge in and out. Don't let the pets run in and out, because people are so attached to their pets. And it is love, but there's so much attachment there. There's the fear of losing. So you make it as peaceful an environment as possible. And it's a really conscious decision to make. And you don't make it cluttered with rubbish. You make it nice with nice views out the window. So a person, when they wake up half asleep, half awake, they can look into this nice space of the sky. This helps their mind be spacious and relaxed. This is the key job. The people who are in the room, what you do, how the room is designed, the way you have everything is there to help this person in that bed be peaceful and spacious and therefore positive. That's the key job. So our biggest problem is, I think, when people are like half in a coma or asleep all the time, we think it doesn't matter, but it totally matters. Because we know when the mind is in a dream or in a coma, it can also be aware of the outside world. Many people have that experience. So even when they're in a coma, only have it peaceful, playing mantras, playing quietly the teachings, or having prayers play. This can help a mind at a very subtle level. I always tell the example of a friend of mine, Judy, in Sydney, was older, and she was in the ER because she looked like she'd gone into a deep coma. And I asked her husband if I could go and visit at night because it was quieter at night. He told them I was this Buddhist nun. And when I got there, they said, please don't ring any bells. I promised I wouldn't ring any bells. So I just sat there with Judy, and she was totally, zonked out, wired up. And they said she was in a deep coma. Didn't expect her to come out. So I'd just say prayers in her ear. I'd whisper in her ear prayers, certain prayers. She was a Buddhist. And occasionally, because I'd asked, she was very close to a couple of these lamas who'd stayed in her house over the years. So I asked their students to pray for Judy. So I'd whisper every now and again, Judy, Songtsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, Sakya Trinzit is praying for you. Weeks later, she came out of a coma, and I went to visit her, and she's told me that the only thing she remembered was this husky voice. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window saying exactly those words. Now, that you can't deny. Nobody on the planet except me knew those words were said. So there's so many examples like that. So that was powerful for her mind. You could say that, And your animals as well. I mean, just one of my friends in Australia has guinea pigs, and she loves the Buddhist teachings, and she has she has playing medicine Buddha mantras all the time for her little guinea pig, So when one of her little guinea pigs was dying, she'd do that. And she was so somehow I've heard of many stories of animals becoming so peaceful just by having the mantras play quietly, because it's got a very powerful sound, and sound is very subtle. And when you're in a coma or half awake and half asleep, it can really have strong impact on you. You understand? So that means why, if your old grandma's dying, keep it very quiet in the room. The only sound should be something like mantras or prayers, It's so peaceful for their mind and touches them at a deeper level. So have the place quiet, have it very nice looking. The other thing is, with all due respect to doctors and nurses who are so kind, probably the worst place to die is a hospital, because it's so noisy and busy and clanking doors and people and other people's families and crying and tears and banging. It's so distressing, especially when you are sicker and getting close to death. You're incredibly sensitive, even to the slightest shift in the wind can be affecting you. So you've got to really make sure the environment is so quiet, peaceful, and conducive to them being positive and calm. This can't be stressed enough, And just because they're in a coma doesn't mean anything should be different. They can be aware. I remember one story of one Italian mother who wouldn't let them pull the plug on her boy, and he was in a coma for 25 years. He came out of his coma and said he was conscious the whole time. That's intense, isn't it? That you might know how it works, but you can't argue with that. He died eventually anyway, but 25 years. That's incredible, isn't it? And, I remember vividly one time in one retreat, I had these vivid dreams. I think people call them lucid dreams. For about a week, it's in the rainy season in India, so it really pours in the monsoon time. So we'd have our nap in the afternoon after lunch. And for about this week, I was crystal clear, these dreams I was having, but also I could hear everything going on the outside. I didn't see anything, but I heard crystal clear, both the dreaming and seeing and listening to what's going on. That's a possibility. So when you know that, you're really respectful. Just because they're unconscious doesn't mean they're not conscious, doesn't mean they're not aware at some level. And the other thing is, a big one, I think, for us in the West and our medical professions, we're really good at drugs, we know that, and we're good at painkillers. But often we want to drug a person out of their brain because it's convenient and with respect. But, she looks so peaceful. Well, I'm sorry, that's just not true. You can medicate physical pain. You cannot medicate mental anguish. So if you're freaking out mentally, then you'll just have freaked out dreams. So it's really these things we've got to pay attention to. So even if a person is in the dreams or is quiet or in a coma, you still make it peaceful. You still make it nice. You play mantras and prayers. This is something really important, I think, because then when the time of death does come and their mind is peaceful, the right karmic seed will be triggered and they will leave their body in a quiet way. And death will actually, when a positive karmic seed has been triggered, they say, Rinpoche says this in the book, that death is a very pleasant experience. It's very interesting. And in a way, it's because as your mind's getting more subtle, when your mind's more subtle, it can kind of, I know this sounds a bit cosmic. We talked about when you get meditation skills, you get this ability to have what they call clairvoyance. The mind, when your mind gets more subtle, it can cognize phenomena that our grosser level just can't. This is not mystical. This is real in Buddhism. There are the techniques there. So as your mind's getting more subtle at death, you're much more aware of more subtle things. So you can see your future life coming, you can sort of, so when it's peaceful, that means a positive life or even a God realm or the Pure Lands, death is very blissful. A friend of mine in California, he was fell off the roof at our Dharma center, the Buddhist center there, Vajrapani Institute. And his wife was there and he died in her arms. And she said he was blissful, very, very joyful. He died very happily, which means a positive karmic seed was triggered, and so his future life would be positive. So, but if you die with a lot of fear and negative karmic seed is triggered, it really is like dying is like a nightmare, intensely painful. Are we communicating? So I think it's good to ask questions. I've made a few points. We've only got a bit of time, so let's ask questions because this is really on this topic. It's very helpful. So please ask me some questions, people. Anything at all about the death process, death, anything you like. Yes. Yes, darling.
Every time I hear this, and thank you so much for
Okay,
teaching about this final moment and how important it is.
Yeah.
It just seems to me like,
Well, it's a series of final moments. It's all right. It's not just 1 second.
okay.
Go on.
It just seems like such a high standard to me.
No, I hear you. It's a really
And
good
it
point.
almost-
No, I know,
It
darling.
feels punishing. It feels like, well, if most people die that I've known anyway, in some sort of state of agitation.
That's right.
And it just seems like such a painful thing to think that because they died,
Mhm.
which is so human in a way.
No, it
especially
is
in the
human. It is
West,
human. I know.
That
I know.
then they're gonna have
I know.
terrible
Now,
death.
but can I use an analogy? You know how terrifying freeways are, right?
Yeah.
And how the tiniest second can make a difference.
Yeah,
That's pretty intense, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for me to tell you, you'd better be conscious and clear when you drive on the freeway. You
Yeah.
don't respond like that, do you? You agree with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Okay,
same here,
that's a
but
good
we're
thing.
hearing it as punishment.
Yeah,
See, that's the trouble. We hear this as punishment and
Right.
reward, like not fair. Well, it's not
Yeah.
fair that you get smashed to smithereens on the freeway either, but honey, it's your decision to drive that car. And there are ways to be clear and strong and careful and aware on the car.
Mhm.
That you hope, the best you can do. So I mean, that's the most intense experience driving on freeways. The danger is phenomenal. I mean, if we really thought about it, we would never drive again. It's so horrific.
right.
You hear my point?
Yeah, that's.
It's really a good example, but because it's religion and it's death and it sounds like heavy. It sounds like someone's punishing you.
right.
Like you said, a high standard to
Right.
meet. That's a pretty high standard on a freeway, baby, to keep your wits together. I'm really serious now. And there's many examples in our life of things that are intensely difficult that make 1 second will make, especially driving at 120 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour is incredibly intense. Look at the consequences when we don't. It's horrific. But no one says it's not fair
Yeah.
because we know no one's doing it to us.
Yeah, I realize when I ask that, it's.
I know,
low in
But it's
anxiety
very,
and-
that's right.
yeah.
And we're all the same. We've got to think about it.
Yeah.
And so this is why this is so important, to provide the conditions. And when you can just simply be a kind, loving person, this makes all the difference, like a miracle, Do you understand? And even then you can't guarantee,
Right.
but we all we do is do our best. I know your point exactly. It's a good point. Thank you. Yes,
Thank you,
Adrian.
Rinpoche.
Yes.
I love you so much.
Oh, you do? Okay, I'm so happy he loved me so much.
It's selfless because you liberate me.
Sweetheart, come on. Come on. Cut to the chase, Adrian. What's your question, babe? Come on.
I'd like to say, what are the specific techniques for clairvoyance? Because I do see that I'm becoming more clairvoyant.
Well, I'm very pleased for you. Okay. That's a bit like asking me, what are the specific techniques to be able to do a really good backhand while you're playing please listen to me, Adrian, while you're playing Federer at the US Open. That's the question. So then the answer will be, I'm going to say to you, well, how much tennis have you played? And if you haven't played much, then what you're telling me is you've got some tendency to play because you're tasting it. So you better go back to basics. So then that means you need to get a practice. You need to take lay bow, you take refuge, you've got lots of prostrations, lots of practice, listen to the teachings. There's many, you've got to have a view of the whole Buddhist path. And then at some point, when you've given up attachment to food and sex and drugs, you won't care about those things. You'll be able to go to the mountains ready, and you'll stay there for 1, 2, 3 years to get single pointed concentration. Generally speaking, that's the answer. I'm serious. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm mean.
I understand.
And the techniques are all there in detail in the texts, sweetheart. Because then when you get single pointed concentration, you will get that. It will come naturally because you've accessed the subtler level of your mind that has that capability. And it won't be just flashes of it. The flashes of it is just showing there's some potential there. But we don't know about any techniques to get it, but it's all there and this is coming from India from 3,000 years ago. They're all there. The techniques of how to get single point of concentration, which is what brings it properly, clearly, without mistake. So aim for it, want to have it, but just practice the whole, I'm talking the Buddhist perspective, practice the whole path. Start from scratch. You understand? Good, darling. Yes.
Question
Anthony.
online.
Yes, good.
I read recently that the bardo can be a terrifying place. What factors influence one's bardo
Exactly. Okay. So this death process, the way they describe it in the more advanced teachings, in the esoteric Buddhist teachings, the Vajrayana, it's based upon this, Okay. They say the death process is exactly the same as this process of going to sleep. The same things occur, and the same deconstruction of the same components. You stop breathing, then the subtle mind is there, and then eventually that leaves the body, and then between this life and the next, then you go to sleep, and then you wake up in a dream, which is a more subtle experience, isn't it? A dream, that's just subtle mind. So the intermediate state after you leave the body is exactly the same as a dream state. It literally is experientially like a dream, because it's your more subtle mind experiencing it. So so if you have a raging fight with your hubby and want to kill him one day, and then you go to sleep, it's likely you'll have a nightmare. Well, if you die with incredible fear and panic, it's likely your intermediate state will be fearful. But in general, we all know, even if it's a nice dream, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Unless you're really special, you have very little control over it. So it will be like a dream. So if you die with a virtuous state of mind, and then you've triggered the seed that will produce a nice human birth, it's likely your intermediate state won't be so difficult. Do you understand? That's the answer, really. Yeah. Next question. Anybody, anywhere. Yes, darling.
So what can we do with people that pass away? Like not that way, like
Sure.
can we help them? Because
Of course.
I lost
Yes.
3 very good friends in the last 10 years, plus my mom, and they all died in hospitals. I send the prayers, I send the Buddhas, the images. I asked one of my best friend's son, please put the phone on her ear, and she smiled a little bit. She was about to die, but the whole process was mistaken, was like this Western, another of my best friend died, I was there, and they were packing her and she was in pain.
I understand, darling. I
What
understand.
can we do?
I understand, sweetheart.
Is anything that one can
So
we
you're
do?
asking, is anything you can do after death, you're saying?
Yeah, for all this
course.
mistaken.
Of course, no,
process.
darling, of course, and that's, yeah, of course. Because, okay, the Buddhist view, and this is Lama Zopa's book, he's always giving endless practices you can do. So this book, the first is like background teachings about the death process and karma. Then the main bulk of the book is what to do at the weeks and months before. Then the next part is what to do the days before, the hours before, at the time the breath stops, at the time the mind leaves, and then the weeks and days after the mind leaves. And then even after that, there's millions of practices to do. There's so many things we can do to help people before they die, at the time of death, and after they've died. All we can do is, and Rinpoche is an expert at bucket loads of practices, and the book really is a handbook. There's like 87 practices, different kinds of methods, different practices, different things we can do to help sentient beings through the entire process.
you
Okay.
referring to the Tibetan Book of the Dead or Tibetan Book of?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily, the Beckon Book of the Dead, I wouldn't recommend because it just happens to be a text. It's pretty esoteric that somehow has captured the imagination of the West.
Tibetan Book of Living and Dying.
Oh, that's different. That's
That's
Geshe, that's Sogya Rinpoche. Absolutely, that is that's another a modern teacher teaching about that includes the way of death and how to work with it. Exactly, it's a really good book, yes. But the one I'm particularly talking about here is a very precise, like handbook, how to face death without fear. It's quite fat, with lots of practices in it. It's devoted just to that. It's all about how to help at the different stages. I highly recommend. There are others as well, of course there are. Absolutely, it's a good book. That's exactly right. Yes.
I know, I know when a person dies, their heart stops, but how do you know when, their mind lives? on?
Exactly. Good point, Anne. It's all described in Rinpoche's book. The way they say it is that, this death process, it's described in terms of 8 stages of gradually, first your eyes start to go, the body gets heavy, the ears start to go, each of the senses stops. And by the time the first 4 stages, by the time you stop breathing, that, of course, for our modern world, that's when you're dead. Isn't it? That's a really interesting point. And this is a point I'm going to bring up about the business of what to do if your loved one wants to give their organs. It's a really interesting concept. We'll discuss that. So the Buddhist, this view is, no, you're not dead yet. We've got gross consciousness, which is the sensory. That stops by the time you stop breathing. But then you've got subtle consciousness, which is actually really all your mental states, but they're technically more subtle. But there's no evidence in that body of any life. You can't see brain movement. You can't hear heart. There's no indication of the presence of life, the way we describe it. But then that can take from there up to 3 days before the consciousness will leave the body. And Rinpoche lists them in the book. There are various indicators of when the mind has left the body. And there's ways of checking this. But usually after 3 days with certainty, the common one among Tibetan Buddhists, you keep the body, if you can, for up to 3 days. And there's different sections what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in a hospital, what to do if your loved one dies suddenly, what to do if your loved one gives their organs. And this is a really interesting topic. So let me talk about this one. While I was editing this book, I was also reading this wonderful book by an American medical journalist called Dick Tracy, and it's called The Undead. And he's a very funny fellow, so he kind of cracks jokes all the time. His expertise is death, right? And he's in the American, not in another country. So the main point of the book was all the conflicts and problems and contradictions and confusions now in the American medical profession, all because about when actually death is, all because of the business of giving organs. Now, first of all, Lamazoba, there is a chapter in there where he talks about this, what to do if your loved one gives their organs. First of all, he praises it hugely. He said, it's an amazing wish that you want to give your heart or your liver to another person. How incredible. What a marvelous way to die. Such a pure motivation. It can only be beneficial for that person. But there are dangers in it, according to the Buddhist perspective. So I'll give you the example. So, but the interesting point to this author was because, we know ourselves over the centuries in all the different cultures, there always are reports of people, quote unquote, coming back to life. It's so common. Everybody, but if you take the medical profession, it's in the too hard basket because it just doesn't fit. But now this is becoming a big interference. People are ready to cut this bloke's liver out and the damn man comes back to life. Do you understand? So it's really confusing. So it's really getting people to question the modern assumptions, and that's the point of this book. And I thought it was brilliant that people are actually beginning to look. I mean, there's all sorts of, so he had the same author had a whole chapter on what they call out-of-body experiences. People have these while they're on the operating table, under anesthetic, unconscious. But the number of reports, people reporting vividly exactly what the doctor said, what they talked about, what they joked about. Of course, mostly they're fairly cynical and say, no, not possible. But he joked and talked about this one particular woman who had to have the most radical procedure, and that for their point of view, she could not possibly have any experience. There's no way, but she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. So you can't argue with these experiences. You just can't argue with it. And I think it's brilliant because it's forcing people to look at their assumptions. This is why the Dalai Lama over these last 40, 45 years, having all these conversations with all the best brains in the West. And this is one of the common ones they talk about. In other words, what is a person? What is reality? What is the mind? What are we? Who are we? I think they're great conversations to be having. It's marvelous, you know. So, but the interesting point is this, in this book, there was one woman who was giving her heart or one of her organs. So there she was, stopping breathing. There they are, keeping her breathing. So this is the point now. They're keeping her breathing. So she's all warm and toasty still, looking like she's alive, but from their perspective, she's dead, right? But from their perspective also, she's not feeling anything. She's not really alive. You're keeping her vitals going. But from the Lama Zopa said, from the Buddhist point of view, if a person can breathe and their body can be warm and the heart can beat, even if it's artificial, it's real. The mind is there. If the mind actually has gone, you can't get a dead body to feel warm. So it's an interesting point. So anyway, in this book, it was very fascinating. Okay, one more point. In the way that I talked before, when a person can be in a coma or fast asleep, like in my experience, you can still be conscious at this subtle level, right? People report this all over the world. So it can be the same if the mind is still there. So when your loved one is dead, your grandma's in the bed, she's in the room, and there she's dead, and the priests are coming and saying the prayers. But, you know, so her mind, her subtle mind can still be there for these 3 days. So that's why in the Buddhist view, you still keep it quiet and peaceful because her mind can still be there. So if you can have your consciousness be aware of what's going on around you when you're in a coma, you can also be aware when the gross level has stopped. Do you understand my point? And this is what the story is about. So this woman who was giving one of her organs, the nurse who was monitoring the heartbeat said that when they got the circular saw to cut her open from head to toe, the heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And the author said, I wonder what a dead person has to be anxious about. Well, from this Buddhist perspective, her subtle consciousness was still there because she's able to breathe. She is still conscious, but in her case, she was also conscious. She was having an out-of-body experience. So of course she's freaking out. She knows who she is, and she's suddenly seeing them with their damn circular saw, and she has a panic attack. Well, that's the worst problem, because that can then change the karma, and the mind would leave the body, and a negative karma could be triggered. So it doesn't mean in every case, because I had an operation one time, and it was the best sleep I'd ever had. I wish I could get those drugs over the counter. I'll never forget that. It was delicious. Anesthetic. It was incredible. I'd never had such a better sleep. But you can't get it over the counter, can you? What a pity, I tell you. I can't believe it was the most divine sleep on the planet. You understand? But this woman was conscious. So she was seeing what was happening. That's my deduction. So as Lama Zopa says, and he explains it all, and he said, the hospitals should be careful. That's all he said, you know. So I find that very fascinating. So anyway, it's 3 days before the body will go. And then usually it's never after the 3 days, but it's best always to leave for the 3 days. But of course, what Rinpoche says is that if you're in a hospital, he says, even if you've got 30 minutes, do what you can, do prayers, do practices, try to help the person's mind once they've stopped breathing. Then there's other things. For example, my sister died, okay? My darling older sister, she fell down the stairs and smashed her brain, right? She fell on her head. So anyway, my sisters rang me, and I happened to be going to Australia the next day or the day after. So Qantas kindly gave me my flight earlier. And I said to my sisters, who are all materialists, you know, they used to be Catholics, but they're not anymore. They don't have the Buddhist view. So as far as they were concerned, she was dead, but she was still breathing. I said, please keep her breathing. She's dead, Robina. I said, I know, but just please keep her breathing. Because I wanted to get there while her mind is still there. I had the Dalai Lama pray. I had Lama Zopa pray. I did prayers. I got there in time, and I was able to spend time with her in the bed. You know, I was so happy about that. But the interesting point was I was trying to keep it quiet, but there were 7 of us in the family, and we were all bossy. So I wasn't running the show, so I had to be very careful not to upset each other, you know. And I was trying to whisper mantras in Janet's ear, my sister, because she was a fanatic Australian football fan, the Sydney Swans. All my sisters were singing the Sydney Swans football song, you know. And I'm trying to say, oh, money penny in her ear. And one time I said, please, can we have some quiet? They looked all shocked at me, you know. Then they're all crying and laughing because they think she's dead. So it was very funny. So they all left. Then I had about 4 hours with her. And then the kind Burmese nurse, who was a Buddhist, she promised that she would not touch the body when they wouldn't clean it. So I did there's certain things you can do to help the mind leave. So I said, please, can you leave her in the fridge for a couple of days? And you can do this. instead of putting her into the coffin already, put her in the fridge for a couple of days. And even if her mind is there still, you can do prayers and practices at home, and then you can get the body and burn it or whatever. So that happened for my sister. And I was very happy about that. There's different things you can do, and it's all in the Numbers Opus book, you know. Yeah.
Why don't you have, why when you don't have the chance, when you're not in
I
control?
have to talk again, Don. I can't hear.
Why when you don't have a chance, you're not in control, you live your life very peaceful, in harmony and in good life and happiness, and then all of a sudden you get sick and you are in pills and you are out of control, and then
I know, but my feeling is, if somehow it's sort of logical, if you've, the analogy of the freeway, if you've spent your whole life driving really well and carefully, you'll be more equipped at the time of the accident to navigate it. I mean, it doesn't mean still you won't get killed, but I mean, in this one of death, if you've lived a life of good ethics, but I don't mean just being a nice person, I mean conscious ethics. It's got to be a conscious self-awareness. Then it's more that prepares you to deal with life. Your mind won't be so freaking out. You'll be more equipped to deal with it because you've practiced your whole life. This is the best way to prepare for death. I don't think that's illogical. I understand. I really think so. And even again, this is this interesting point. Okay, another example. My friend, one nun in Queensland, in Australia, which is like, it's like the tropic, where the upside down is on the north, it's close to the equator. So it's like Florida. Thick, hot air, you know. It's horrible. I can't imagine how she lives there, but anyway, she loves it. It's called Cairns. And it's even hotter. I think it's even more humid, closer to the equator than this. Anyway, never mind, whatever. But she sits with the dying people. And she had an example of one old guy who suddenly kind of became like a demon, freaking out, his eyes rolling back, screaming like a banshee, looking like he was having the most intense visions of the worst universe possible. So that was like he was dying, and it was like seeing a future suffering life, like the hell realms or something. But then he became peaceful, and then he died peacefully. And she checked with one of her lamas, and he said, yeah, it seems like he purified a bunch of karma by having those horrible feelings, and then he died peacefully. So different things can happen. And even as Lama Zopa says, once a person's died, there's practices you can do. The stuff to do while they're in the intermediate state, the stuff you can do after. There's always practices you can do, you know, always things you can do to help. Do you understand? Yes.
I'm wondering if you could speak to pain in the process, because I'm also thinking about, like, everything you're saying also describes like the perfect conditions for birth.
Yes.
And getting into this realm of birth work is like, it's the same
Yes.
setup.
Sure.
But then there's this like equation of pain and birth and death that's like we're so afraid of, and especially like in the hospital.
Yes.
And there's also this question of like who's responsible for the pain, and it's almost like there's this relationship to the esoteric practice, like these practices. It's like it's esoteric, it's woo woo. You have to like convince this like structure that's already in place of.
Well, there's only so much you can do, isn't there?
Mhm.
And this is where all this advice in this book, for example, is as if you are the boss of the whole process. Because if you're fourth down the totem pole, like in my family, I had no power more than my other 5 sisters and brother over my sister's body. All I could do was quietly fit in to what they allowed me to do. If I'd been in charge, I would have done the whole thing completely differently. So all you can do is what you can do. And I think also with hospitals, I mean, hospitals are very kind people. And we tend to give all the power to the doctors and nurses. We just become hopeless. But if you've got your wits about you and your grandma's in hospital, you'll really let your needs be known in advance. So one, for example, okay, there was an old bloke who's like 96, dying in New York. I'd go up there every day, up the top, you know, up in Manhattan every day and sit with him. He had a rotation of people 24 hours a day sitting with him. So it was crystal clear. It was made to the institution. Don't touch his body when he stops breathing. Don't do this, don't do that. And they complied. So you can organize it if you're lucky enough, or if you're rich enough to have your own room in hospital. Like a friend of mine died in a nursing home, and when he stopped breathing, she shooed out all the doctors and nurses, locked the door, and stayed there for 3 days. So it's as much as you can do your best, and and nurses and doctors in hospitals are very kind. When Lama Yeshe died, they were so kind. They allowed them to take him into a room, and he had all day to do practices and prayers, you know. So I mean, you can, if you got your wits about you and you know what you want, and it's possible to try and to do your best to do it. But the best one is not to die in hospital. But it's hard to say that. It's easy to say that when you're dying from, you know. Are we communicating here? We're dying. Yeah. Back.
You keep mentioning not touching the body after the
Yeah, that's right.
surgery,
That's right.
And so
Because it can disturb the mind. That's why it's so
but
sensitive at that point.
that's touch from a medical, because like my mother, she loved her hair rope, so I rubbed her hair through her death, her last breath, and I just kept rubbing.
That's
I
good.
could've
That's kind.
stopped to give her space.
No, that's okay. It's okay. I understand. the death process is very precisely described, like I said, and the mind gets more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. But because as the mind gets more subtle, the person can be more sensitive to any physical or verbal or sounds easily could disturb them. So suddenly yanking at the body and dragging it off and cleaning it, thinking we're being so nice, the mind is still there. It could disturb. And it could cause the mind to leave at the wrong time, therefore leave through the mind leaves at different places according to the rebirth you get. So it's just a very sensitive time. But touching her head is a very good thing to do. That's nice.
As long as it was about her, not me. Because
That's right. But also gently is nice, because actually, if the consciousness leaves through the crown chakra, that's a very good sign. But don't touch her feet. That's the worst. If the consciousness leaves touching because the heat leaves the body in a very particular way. And if the heat leaves the lower part first, that's good. If the heat leaves the head first, that's not so good. Different things like this. It's all in the book. So you just be very sensitive, quiet, peaceful. Yeah. But I mean, don't sort of, if we're full of attachment and clinging, this is the worst energy to bring in the room. So be very, I always think it's their gig. Everything should be for their benefit. Keep your own emotions out of it. Don't talk. Don't bring your emotion. Be calm and loving and peaceful for their sake. Then cry outside. You understand? That's why it was so funny for my sister, all crying and pulling at her feet and singing the Sydney Swans. I'm sure she preferred that to the mantra anyway, but I'm just talking, it's very funny. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about the name of the book. Oh, looks like they found it. The name of the book.
How to Face Death Without Fear.
No, the American doctor.
Oh,
About
The Undead.
The Undead.
It's hilarious, very funny book.
By Dick Teresi.
Dick Teresi, that's the one. Yeah, it's very interesting, very fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. Hello there.
A lot of people think that this is what makes consciousness. This sack of meat and bones don't make your thoughts or your feelings.
What's your view about it? What do you think makes the thoughts and feelings? You got a view? You got the Buddhist view or one? You're not sure.
Multifaceted.
What, darling?
Comes from many different traditions.
Your view? You're not sure?
You need to claim mine. It's not
Okay.
mine.
That's all right. But I think your point's a good point, though. I agree with you. Totally. Yes, sweetheart.
All of the people, and I'm referring to karma, because the teaching is that everything, is the result of karma, and sowing seeds. So all the people who died of COVID in the hospital alone,
Yes.
with no one.
Yeah, I know, darling. So sad. That really made me sad, actually. And I think it must be heartbreaking to families and to the person.
Would you say that something that they did that was non-virtuous?
Well, you could say all that.
like-
Yeah, of course it is. Anything that's unhappy is because of that. Of course it is. That kind of just goes without saying. Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah. But it's really sad, isn't it, that I think that's an interesting point. My feeling is if it were the COVID time and my grandma were dying in her room, I would rather risk getting COVID or even giving her COVID than not help her mind. Because this is the point here, Lama Zopa says, the nurses and doctors, their job is the body, but our job is the mind. And this is the one that's so important to help. And sometimes we forget that. Do you understand? Yeah. Yes.
So Lama is if the cause is the root of the cause is of previous lives.
Yes.
How do we, while we're conscious, how do we
fix it?
that? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about this yesterday, actually. Well, let's maybe discuss it again today. There are these, especially the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, huge, not just the Buddhist, it's all the traditions, but a huge emphasis on your daily practice, including a component, especially at the end of the day, that we call purification, where you regret the negativity, you have compassion for those you harmed, you do some kind of practice and you vow not to do it again. It's really powerful practice that can really put atomic bombs under all the negative habits. It's sort of like going on a, it's sort of like purification is like, what do you call going on a really serious new regime of eating, stopping eating all the rubbish and only eating the good stuff. You clean yourself up. Now that's what the purification practice is. It's huge. And there's no negative karma we can't purify. So living in vows of morality is very powerful purification because you put atomic bombs under the tendencies of bad ethics, and you do purification every day. It's all there in the teachings. I forgot again. I promised you I'd do it and I didn't do it. I'm going to send a PDF. No, I'm going to send a PDF to Nicole. Have everyone got their emails?
Yes.
So you'll send this PDF to them. I really promised I'd do it and I forgot. I'm going to put a PDF together of all the teachings I'm talking about death, about karma, about the mind, and this practice. I'll send it all and you can get it in your email. Okay, good. I'll do that. I'm so sorry I forgot.
You're saying one way to prepare for death is to lead a good life.
Precisely. It's really the best way of all.
My 85-year-old grandfather led a wonderful life, very kind person.
He what? Very kind. Yeah.
Very
80,
kind.
how old was he when he died?
85.
Yeah.
Got a little bit of a flu, was in bed for about 2 weeks. And there with at his home with his wife and his family, it passed away peacefully.
There you go.
Just a wonderful.
And he was a good man. I think that's the most obvious. That's the most, that it's not as if there's only just this moment of death as we're talking. It's sort of logical that if you spend your life with ethics, with thinking about other people, working on yourself, being kind, this is the most perfect way. Why would your death be fearful? Because you're relaxed. Even if you don't have faith in religion or God or anything, you'll die with a happy mind, I think there's no doubt about it. That's the easiest way to die well. Absolutely. I think it's a great example.
But that isn't always the case. I mean, for example, my husband who passed away from.
Who passed away?
My husband passed away from Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
He was the most loving, kind human being.
Yeah, but the Alzheimer's was the problem.
But
Yeah.
his death was not peaceful.
Because his Alzheimer's got in the way, didn't
Yeah,
it?
so that's what I'm saying. Did he sow these seeds in another life?
No, I understand what you're saying. No, I think when we take this view of karma, you've got to have the big picture that there are thousands of lifetimes and billions of karmic seeds and so many variations of things that could happen. So it's really, it's in general, what he just said is true. But also there's your example of how it can be different. It's not set in stone. So he died unpeacefully, did he?
Horrific.
Was it?
Horrific death.
Really was it, darling?
Horrific. It was even the doctor said they never saw him like it.
Really, sweetheart.
And so, and.
You don't want to tell me how when you say horrific, how, in what way was it? How was it?
My husband was, he was very healthy, physically, all his organs were healthy. He was healthy. He was about Rick's size. He became like an Auschwitz victim. He was trembling. He was having seizures. He was
At the time of death.
the time of death.
Go on.
They were, all the morphine wasn't even giving him comfort.
Sure.
Just the body was just.
And how was he mentally? Could you tell the difference in his mind?
He was agonizing. He was groaning and moaning and sighing and it was horrific. It
I
was like
understand,
someone
darling.
was torturing him.
I understand,
He had
darling.
sores all over his body that was showing.
Yeah, how
I mean,
awful.
everything.
Sweetheart. You see, this is also the point too. Listen, please. This also, it seems to me like that's the ripening of a lot of negative karma from God knows what life. But if we can have the confident view that when bad things rise, this can also just be purification, sweetheart. You see, we don't know people's minds enough. It's easy to say die peaceful. It sounds good. The best we can do is help. But we don't know people's minds or their karma. It can be so subtle that even having that terrible suffering is just purification. So it can be a good sign as well. I mean, it sounds nice to have a nice death, and we all prefer that, but we just don't know things well enough that could easily be. So did you ever, was he a religious man?
Yes, he had a strong faith.
He did have.
He did have a faith.
Were you saying prayers at the
I was
time?
Absolutely. I would, in his ear, I would talk, I would pray.
You
all
were,
of
so
it.
listen,
All of
you said, listen, then this is a very different discussion. That means he was conscious. That means he was hearing the prayers. You could argue he was purifying a lot of old negative karma. And by you doing prayers was helping him. And that could have completely made his next experience even better because of the purification. You got the junk out of the way. There's a possibility of that one, darling. Do you understand me? It's hard to know because we haven't got such wisdom, That could easily be an example. So your darling husband, you helped him. That was great. What else? People. Oh, I'm just moved my thing. What happened? I've done something peculiar. I've lost my picture. Okay. So yeah, yes, leave.
So what I'm starting to think is this oxymoron. I'm gonna think out loud for a second. There
Yeah,
is a
go on.
question here. So we are trying to, if we're following these practices, to clean up the ego, the attachment to the I, which is kind of in a far fashion killing it, right? So we're trying
In a way, trying to get rid of the
move
rubbish.
towards this other thing without it.
The better part of our mind, the virtue and the goodness and wisdom within us, which is our nature.
So the
We're
way
trying to
we're gonna-
uncover our
there's a
true
depth
nature.
Happening to this other part that was habitual.
It's nice to say that. Yeah, it's good.
I'm trying to kind of just.
I know, but don't get too fancy. That's getting a bit carried away. But if you
Let's
like,
say yes.
I know it's like that. I mean, it really is, and that's why it's such intense work. Yeah. So that's why you see, even with your experience, I remember one time, one of my friends is a meditator, serious meditation, 3 years, 4 years, intensive retreats. And at some point, after all these years of practice, he was going out of his brain with rage and anger and despair and arrogance. He was freaking out. I mean, you'd think, oh, by now he's a bit better. And he went to Lama Zopa, and Lama Zopa laughed and laughed and laughed. He said, fantastic. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. So if we've got millions of karmic seeds, your husband was a good man, then this painful experience of junk and vomit coming up, it's clearing it out, honey child. And you were saying prayers at the same time, that can help his mind for the future. You hear me? There's ways of seeing things. Just like that guy who looked like he was a demon and then died peacefully. I mean, your husband too, once he stopped breathing, his mind might have been peaceful for him. You just don't know. Or that's why we don't know, but all we can do is do our best. We can't guarantee anything. All we can do is do as much as we can to learn to drive properly. So that's what I'm talking about, you know. What else, Pete?
We only depends on anybody else to do the work for us. So when we die,
I think that's what, no, we need to do the work ourselves. But to have people support us, because we're not the highest practitioners, is incredibly beneficial. We need support. We need good friends to support us. So if you're, one of the other chapters is, if your loved one is a great meditator, really a highly realized being, they don't need your help. Close the door and walk out. They know what they're doing. If you're a really great yogi, you know what you're doing. You don't need help. You're on the case. You practice all your life and you're ready for it. Yes, sweetheart. Yes.
So my question is regarding the birth in the hospital, since hospital is a very negative environment.
Well, I mean, it's not negative, it's noisy and busy. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're about birth.
Yes.
I think birth's a different discussion.
Oh.
I mean, it would be useful. I mean, well, I mean, don't get me started on birth. I always think we all should have cesareans. I think coming out of the womb, this little narrow channel, your poor little head all squashed, your poor, you know, it must be the baby, the most traumatic experience on earth. I think we've got to have counseling from the day we come out of the womb. I mean, this is my personal opinion. Excuse me. So I think you need a lot of noise and busyness around to help you out. Hell. That's just my opinion, okay, not Buddhist. I just think birth is, I just think we fantasize birth. Okay, some women say it was the most blissful experience on the planet after all the pain, maybe. But I think it must be very true. I mean, if you took a baby who's already been born and then put it through a narrow channel and squeezed it, you'd be sent to prison for torture. I'm not joking. I'm just not the normal medical view, but maybe the medical view has been run by white men for so long. Excuse me, white men. All men actually have been running the medical profession. Maybe we haven't asked the women how to have babies, you know. I mean, no, how a lot of people have babies all sorts of ways, in hot baths, they squat, isn't it? We turn the poor lady upside down and open her legs, isn't it? Doesn't seem very natural. So she's laughing again. Look at her.
Didn't seem like that big a deal.
What?
Didn't seem like that big a deal.
Which one?
I've had a couple of kids.
You didn't have to tell us. Anyway, people, come on. What? Go.
My
Yeah.
if the hospital makes the mind of the soul when he's dying so painful, doesn't the voice of the child makes the child's mind painful over there?
I think death and birth are a very different experience. You need different things. I mean, of course, it can be very traumatic to be born in a horrible way. But I agree, it must be awful for the child. I agree with you. But this is not a hospital that does it. It's the way you're born that does. Birth itself is torturous, isn't it? But I think it's a different experience. The death one is powerful because you're going to go to another life. And the way you die determines the kind of life. That's a very different kettle of fish. You understand my point? That's the main point.
Venerable Robina.
Yes. Hello, sweetheart.
Hi, how are you? If a Buddhist practitioner gets like Alzheimer's or dementia, do you think they can still practice?
You know, I think at that point, there's not much they can do. But what we can do to support their mind and keep it peaceful and let them hear prayers and mantras, just like she did for her husband. I think once you've lost the plot a bit, like, you know, I think it's quite hard to practice. Because you've lost the ability to keep contact, you know, moment by moment. So I think that's why all the more that's when our help is needed. You play their practices 24 hours a day. You keep it quiet for them. So put all the imprints in their mind. That's the most beneficial thing. I think there's nothing much we can do at that point. I'm feeling. Makes sense, doesn't it? Do you think?
So So dementia destroys the mind, or?
Well, okay, if we
Dementia.
check, so what, I suppose the variations of dementia. But the general thing, I think, there's a particular state, using the Buddhist model of the mind, there's a particular part of the mind that's called mindfulness, which is really a very precise part that is the ability to bring yourself back to the job you were doing when you forget what you're doing. So, of course, in meditation, but if you're making a cake and you forget, oh, did I put the eggs in or not? If the mindfulness goes completely, that's when you've literally lost the plot. You can't put together more than, like my sister who fell down the stairs was going down to help her husband because he was completely senile, second by second had no memory, right? Remember the past, he was on the bed of my sister singing the Sydney Swan song, but he couldn't remember second by second. And he was on the bottom of the stairs. She was going down to help him and she fell on her head and she's lying there dying blood and he's lying there not knowing what to do, out of his mind, because he can't do decisions from second to second. So of course the crucial piece is the ability to remember what to do. That's what mindfulness is. And if you've lost that, you've lost the plot, because you can't I mean, even when his wife died, he knew in the bed she was dead, but next second he didn't know. So then when people came to take care of him and they'd say, should we turn the light out? He said, oh, my wife will do that. And then he died like a month later because second by second, he kept thinking, where's Jan, but forgot the next second. So it must have been very painful for him because he couldn't put it together. He had no of this moment by moment mindfulness. That's what goes, as well as, and then all the other stuff that's inside kind of comes vomiting out. If a person suppressed their anger all their life, I mean, they're going to show their anger. They can become like infantile, no control over the mind at all, you know. And that's a very painful experience, I think. So that's where we are really needed, like animals, sick people, old people. Exactly, that's why we needed so badly, to support them and give, even just the animal. My friend with her guinea pigs playing mantras all the time. So it made them peaceful. One of my friend's dogs, she said he was so anxious, wouldn't eat his dinner. The vet said she should knock him, you know, kill him and everything. She didn't want to yet. So she just started to play medicine Buddha mantra. He started to become perked up. He was quiet, because when something sweet like that sound, your mind can go to it and hold on to it. It's very calming for you. But if your mind doesn't have anything to hold on to, especially animals or sick people, your mind just goes bonkers. So if you give them a sweet sound, the mind can focus on that. Instead of giving them crazy television with loud noises, give a sweet, pure sound, and the mind can sort of absorb into that, and it can have a radical difference for the person. It's easy to play a mantra, you know. Do you understand? Yeah. Yes.
Comment from online. Someone said, thank you so much, my Lama. I needed to hear this. I have and I'm purifying like crazy. I have 6 hernias, my retinas are thinning, and I'm on steroid treatments for my eyes. And I feel like I've purified so much. I try to transform everything.
Good. I'm delighted. I'm so happy for you. Keep your mind happy and rejoice.
Then another question.
Yes.
Are the deceased greeted by their loved ones who preceded them in death as well as
I
guides
understand.
and teachers? Do
I
they
know,
assist
I know.
them or help
No,
acclimate
I mean, the
them?
Buddhist view would say it's nothing like that at all. That is a particular view. That would be the Christian view. I remember when, what's her name? Nancy Reagan, who adored her Ronnie. I don't know. Whatever, you know, she loved it. And she asked Billy Graham, will I see Ronnie after I die? And he said, yes. So she was relaxed, waiting to meet Ronnie again. That's the common view among the Christians, isn't it? That's not the Buddhist view, because your loved one could go to all different, you know, all float around, go to different lifetimes. So no, depending on the rebirth you get, even the moment, Lama Zopa says, even the moment your mind leaves the body and then wakes up in this intermediate state, even if you can see your body from the past life, because the karma has finished, there's no memory of it. So a whole new set of rebirths will come. So you won't recognize all your own friends. They're all different people. So it's like from another culture. That's the Buddhist view. Depends on the rebirth you get. You understand? Hope the person understands that. Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right, sweetheart.
What about like suicide and
Yes.
euthanasia?
I understand.
For someone, for instance, who has led a good life, but then just wants to not.
I understand. It's a really big topic. Let's talk about it, you know. So, okay. Like we're describing, sorry, let me fall apart. I'm describing here why it's so important to have a person kind of metaphorically hold our hand through this process, is so we can become peaceful. And when we're peaceful, positive thoughts can manifest. We can be relaxed and virtuous and loving and kind. And that's the best way to die, ideally. Now, So let's analyze without judgment. When I think it's usual that if you decide you want to kill yourself, it's not out of love and compassion. It's not because you're blissfully happy. It's because you're despairing, or the suffering is unbearable, or or whatever it might be. This is not being judgmental. It's human. Life is unbearable. So it can't. How can that make your mind peaceful? So for us in the West, it's a very interesting topic. I'm not trying to make simple statements. I'm trying to look at it. This whole idea now that we have the right to kill ourselves. We do have the right. Absolutely, we have the right to kill ourselves. But I remember the Dalai Lama said one time, we have the right to have an abortion, we have the right to do anything, but we have to look at the consequences of our actions. So if we understand the death process from this perspective, that the crucial point is to be peaceful and relaxed, somehow, thinking about killing yourself, organizing it, getting the airplane, going there, taking the drug, it's kind of, you're obsessed with dying. So how can that be? I mean, if you know you're going to go, if you're such a high being and you can choose your death, then you're okay. But I just can't imagine how that can cause your mind to be peaceful at the time. And even if it isn't, you're not certain. We don't know our karma. And the thing is, the Buddhist view would say that just naturally, as the death process starts, intense, unbelievable fear, more powerful than we experience in our daily life, is triggered because of attachment. This is quite subtle. But we don't know that because we don't remember dying. So it's a bit playing with fire. It's not moralistic. It's because you don't want to take a suffering rebirth. That's the reason. It's a logical thing. So it's something to really think about. That's all. So it's the same as killing your pussycat. We discussed this yesterday. Of course, your pussycat's suffering. Your grandma is too. But of course, if you have the view of continuity of consciousness, and if you have this view of death and rebirth and all the different things, you'd think twice about taking control, because you can't be certain of what's going on in their mind, and therefore what karma is triggered, and therefore what rebirth they would take. So it's a big responsibility, and we're not qualified to take it. So the Buddhist approach will be do everything you can to make the person peaceful, happy, calm, as much as we can, whether it's your dog or your grandma. It's not a moralistic issue. It's just practical. You see my point? But we've got to think about it. Do you understand, darling?
I have a
Yeah.
question, perhaps maybe misunderstanding this. When I think of things like karma in Buddhism, the classic from 35,000 feet, or right living, right actions, etc.
Yeah.
I have the perception, perhaps I'm wrong, that the mental state that we're in, regardless of virtue or actions or our positive thoughts, will determine how we live.
So I missed some point in your discussion. I'm really forgive me. I missed some points in there, so I didn't get the whole story.
Setting up a preface.
Okay, I missed it, unfortunately. So say it again.
I was just, perhaps I have a misunderstanding, or there's some degree of logical inconsistency to me. I think of Buddhism, I think, right action, right thinking.
Right, exactly.
Et cetera.
Sure.
Et cetera.
Living your life like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you live your life like that, then?
It seems to me that how you feel at the moment of your death, particularly if it's not due to a negative action, a negative thought, just either random circumstances.
It's either what?
Random circumstances or the actions of a third party to try and make you feel uncomfortable or whatnot. Why did that determine how you live in a future life? Because it seems consistent to me, like from a comic perspective.
Okay. No. Okay.
I must misunderstand.
No, I understand. So again, let me try and say the point that Lama Zopa was talking about in his book, which is the teachings. Can I use a simple example of the freeway? If you're driving a car and you're full of fear, freaking out, if you're going to have an accident while you're freaking out and the ego's grasping and you're panicking, you're going to have a terrible disaster. So what follows from that could be much worse than if you keep your wits about you and you have the accident as much skill as you can without much fear, you can do some navigating and prevent maybe the worst consequences. So the idea is, at the time of death, we've got millions of karmic seeds, okay, in their bank vault. At the time they describe in this process, is a technical process. At the time you start to stop breathing, one of those karmic seeds is literally triggered. That will be the one that will determine your next rebirth. It's quite technical. So the way your mind is at that time. So if you're panicking and freaking out, when the mind is very distressed, that'll trigger a negative seed, which will cause you to say, like, take an animal birth. If your mind is peaceful and virtuous, that can encourage a virtuous seed, which will cause you to get a decent human rebirth. It's as simple and technical as that.
It seems grossly disproportionate to me. Like
Disproportionate in what sense?
Meaning in the sense of you had 7 years of hypothetically good actions.
No, but you didn't say that part. Well, you did say that part. So this is a technical thing that happens at death. So what I'm saying is it's more than likely because you spent your life practicing, you will be peaceful at the time of death. That's the point. If you spent your life driving 20 years properly, even if an accident does come, you're less likely to freak out and panic, is all I'm trying to say. So setting yourself up to die by living a good life is the way to have a peaceful mind, which is the way to trigger a virtuous karmic seed, which is the way to trigger a human birth for the next one. That's the point. You can't guarantee anything, but this is as much as you can do. You get my point now? Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yes, somebody else.
What is your opinion on those who cling to death live and those who cling to life die?
You're going to have to say it again, sweetheart. I can't hear.
What is your opinion on those who cling to death live and those who cling to life die?
I think it probably sounds like a nice saying. I like it. I don't know. Sure. Did you just make it up or did you read it somewhere?
You read it out.
Oh, okay. But if you cling to death and you're going to live, I'm not sure. I would say if you're going to really know that you're going to die and live within your life, then you're going to live a good life. But if you freak out about death, you have a disastrous life. So that's a way of saying it. I agree with you. Good point. And that's the whole thing about preparing for life. One of the major reasons we have so much fear in general is because we can't stand the thought of things changing. So more than anything, we can't stand the thought of not being me. It's so primordial, you know. So that's why I'm thinking every day in your life about also being ethical, but also thinking about the reality of impermanence. So, you know, I always remember, I use one example, even just daily life, forget about fear of death, fear of change. So, you know, I use the example of I use the example of Nicole Kidman, that Australian actor. I'm not trying to be mean about it, but it's such a good example. When she was with Tom Cruise, I read an interview like 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And she said, because everything was going well, they were happy, life was beautiful. And she said, we will be together until we are 80. To analyze that. So because life was beautiful, which is marvelous, and then because of attachment, getting what it wants, which is a lovely life, you can't bear the thought of not having it. So you project into the future and say, because it's nice now, we will be together when we're 80. It's complete fantasy. And we all think that. So when lovely things happen, we can't bear the thought that it might change. So we say it's going to last forever. We will be together forever. It's complete fantasy. It's based on attachment. That's how we all are. So we can't stand the thought of good things changing into bad. Now, the other thing is, and indeed, when they did split up and Tom Cruise left her, I'm just talking, she said, I remember reading another interview. I like reading interviews with people and stories. She went into despair. You know, now why? What happens when the bad thing changes, the good changes to bad, which we can't bear the thought of? Now you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel and you think that will never change. And then you kill yourself. I mean, she didn't kill herself, I'm just talking. So because of attachment, we only want nice things. And then when attachment doesn't get it anymore, we despair. It's because but if we face the reality that things change moment by moment, death, and as Lama Zopa says, best to think, I will die today. So the first time we think that, we think it's ridiculous. We think, oh, I'm going to die today. I'm going to die today. I'm going to die. That's not like that. You internalize it and realize the reality of impermanence. No, therefore, the consequence of thinking you might die today means you're going to value life all the more. It's the best way to live your life, knowing it's precious. But if you think life's going on forever, you just waste it. Oh, and blah, 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 can't be bothered, you know. We've got to be more realistic. So living a life of ethics within the framework of the reality of impermanence is the best way to live your life. Then you'll make every moment precious. Then you won't waste your life. And then death will be fine when it comes. It won't be shocking to you. That, I think, is the real point here. So we'll leave you with that. Okay, people?
I have one more question, please.
Yeah, go.
So is it better to live your life with good ethics or better to live your life as your true self?
Well, you know, I think true self is depending. Let's say you've got a Buddhist view. Let's say you come into this life, a really nice guy with good ethics, but you've got a particular tendency to want to kill ants, which is not ethics. But because it's your true self, because it just comes naturally, no one teaches you, then I don't think true self is necessarily valid. You've got to, if your true self is in sync with good ethics, perfect. You see my point? So we should be conscious. We have very strong habits. Some of us have a strong habit to lie or kill. Maybe we don't know why, due to karma, Buddha says. So that could be feeling your true self. But then if we look at it and check on it, we're going to see it causes us suffering. So we want to adjust our true self. I mean, the Buddhist will be our true self is the ethics, is goodness, is clarity, is wisdom. So to get in touch with that, wow, fantastic. Time to go. So those of us, I wanted to sing this little prayer for, they talk about the, this, our Lama Zopa died 2 months ago. More than that. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. And we have this Dalai Lama wrote a little prayer. They call it, when your Lama dies, because they talk about reincarnation in Buddhism, we want him to come back again as quickly as possible to continue teaching us. So we have this little prayer for the swift return, they call it, of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So some of you might know him, but we'll just say that. I'll read it out, and you just hear the words and have those in your heart, if that makes sense to you. For the Dalai Lama. Oh, you've got it there?
Yeah.
Oh, well done. Thank you so much. People can see it?
Screen share.
If you want to. If you'd like to join in with me, these little few thoughts, the Dalai Lama wrote this little prayer. There we go. Well done. Thank you, darling. Okay, very nice. If you'd like to, otherwise just relax, it's okay. So, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, that's a term used to refer to these great saints like bodhisattvas, or the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, these Sanskrit words referring to certain levels of practitioners, okay? Victorious Lozang, who's referring to Tsongkhapa, who's our lineage Lama, 14th century, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands. Please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni, that's Buddha, the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace, such a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the oceans of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Okay, so we just dedicate, a little prayer to dedicate, just thinking here we've been this 4 days or just today as many times. So as many moments we've had thoughts, none of these go astray. For the Buddhist view, everything stays in our mind, in our memory, we just can't access it, but it's all there. So every thought we've had also is seeds we've planted, use that analogy. So we think we're going to nourish these seeds with our practice from this point, our own effort, our practice, so that we can manifest eventually as our, develop fully our true self, our true nature of goodness and clarity and wisdom for our sake, and because we live in this crazy world together for the sake of others. And then may bodhicitta, may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. Chang chob sem chog rinpoche, ma ke panam ke gyuchig, ke panyam pa me payang, gong ne gong du pavasho. That's all, people. Done. Our time is finished. Gone like a dream.
Thank you.
All over.
Can we offer you
Come on.
a big mandala?
A what?
A mandala.
Oh, you do the mandala. So I'm going to offer the universe as a thank you for the teachings, as well as offering the representations of enlightened body, speech, and mind. It's a very Tibetan tradition. So offering the representations of body, speech, and mind is so that we can develop our own enlightened body, speech, and mind. Okay.
I want to take 100.
If you want to join in.
If you'd like one
The short
to-
prayer.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
so.
short prayer.
Saj, who's going to sing? Saji perki jogshin metog strami rablingji ni de gen padi sange jingdu mi te urwagi droko nam dag jingla chapasho. And then someone else can read the other the words there.
May
Say
our
them in English.
venerable Lama's life be firm. Her right divine actions spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispelling the darkness of light
of all beings.
Okay.
Three realms.
Awesome.
Them, Buddha,
Okay,
Brahma,
thank you.
Buddha,
You take them out and
Buddha,
put it out for the culture. Take it out and I'll give you the culture. Okay, no, you have this one, come on. You can.
All right, now we'll offer
There you go.
some Thank
Oh,
you
you don't
so
have to
much
offer
for
cutters.
this.
You don't have to offer cutters. No. People want to offer cutters?
Yes, yes.
Oh, all right. You people on Zoom, goodbye. I'm here getting cutters. Thank you so much, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're offering cutters too.
We're offering
Oh,
cutters
look,
too.
you are
We're offering cutters too.
Thank you, your cutters. I've got them,
Thank you.
Patty. I've got them, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
So nice.
I brought my kids.
Did you wear? Where? Are they pretty? Where are they?
My two girls.
Come on. Thank you. Hello, darling. Happy to meet you. Happy to meet you. Happy to meet you, darling. Very good. Look at you, your cutter. Amazing. Thank you for my short question. Very nice. Hola, y ella se la va a poner. Oops. You turn this off.
Yeah.
Someone,
Yeah.
thank you. There you go. I hear from you. Next step. Yes, I'm so glad. Good. What's he eating there? I heard he just
He's starting on the 21st. He's giving Buddhist, Samaja, Vajra, Yogini, all these things, college.
You've done these in the past? Have you got any of these?